everyone. Welcome back to the Psychedelic Entrepreneur podcast. Today I have Michael Garfield joining us from Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hi, Michael. Thanks for being here.
Hello.
So good to finally have you on and connect with you. So if you don't know Michael's work, he's a paleontologist-futurist, and he's devoted to helping navigate our age of accelerating weirdness and helping cultivate the curiosity and play we'll need to thrive in it. As a host and producer of both Future Fossils podcast and the Santa Fe Institute's Complexity podcast, Michael acts as an interlocutor for a worldwide community of artists, scientists, and philosophers, a practice that he feels his synthetic and transdisciplinary mind jazz performances in the form of essay, music, and fine art. Standard bearer for a new generation of boundary-defying scholars, Michael refuses to be enslaved by a single perspective, creative medium, or intellectual community, walking through the walls between academia and festival culture, theory and practice, speaking and performing everywhere from Moogfest to Burning Man, South by Southwest to Boom Festival, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia to Long Now's in Ignite Talks to COSM, the Chapel of Sacred Mirrors, who's located right across the river from me. You can follow him on Substack, Medium, and Twitter, or join his book club on Patreon for a kaleidoscope avalanche of explorations into human technology, coevolution, the pre- and post-history of creativity and communication, and other soulful and subversive futurism. Subscribe to his music on Spotify and Bandcamp, and you can follow him on Instagram for clips from his works in progress, including all his amazing art. Michael, wow. Before the podcast, I was saying, what is it that you don't do? Because you're up to a lot of really interesting work. And I've been following your work and hearing a lot about you for many years. The one question I always ask for people getting started on this podcast is, what is your journey? What brought you to where you are now? And I'm curious, did you have some former career working as a corporate attorney? Which I really doubt you did. I'd love to hear a little bit about your path to bring you to where you are now.
No, actually, my father told me when I was a teenager that I should be both of my parents actually said I love to debate so much that I should be an attorney.
Oh God, I used to be told that.
Yeah, but that is not my way, and I think my mom is happier knowing that I went into the arts. I don't know. I mean, I guess I was just thinking about this because I was looking at the Santa Fe Institute Facebook group that I started 4 years ago. I work there in communications, and this hub for complex system science is where the fictional mathematician Ian Malcolm from Jurassic Park ostensibly was housed as a parent institution, right? So that's probably the place to start the story, is reading Jurassic Park at age 7 in 1991. And that was a psychedelic experience for a kid who loved dinosaurs and was not prepared for chaos theory and, nonlinear dynamics and just, scientific paradigm shifts. And yet I managed to robustly pursue the dinosaur trajectory. Through college, I was doing vertebrate paleontology fieldwork out in Wyoming every summer, and it was a past life, like you said. And then in college, and I cannot say that psychedelics had no part in this, although it's not like a clear causal thing. But the last semester of college, I had 2 courses, one in animal flight, one in animal communication. The animal communications piece had papers on the evolution of songbird learning and like how they maintain, like how they learn and maintain songs and the relationship between genes and culture. And this other paper on the evolution of language in humans, like a mathematical model for the evolution of syntax. And it blew my mind open because I realized that all of this stuff seemed to suggest that the complexity of the environment provides an occasion for which the organisms in that environment are either fit or unfit to adapt. And if they can adapt, then they themselves become more complex and intelligent in order to navigate that complexity. And I was like, wait a minute, this is deep. This is the origins of multicellularity, the origins of social organisms were in that same kind of dynamic. And I stopped caring so much about dinosaurs specifically and more about the big patterns. And like I was reading Ken Wilber at the time, Colorado integral philosopher who has for decades been keen on bringing all of these different disciplines together. If you're familiar with Alex and Allison, Alex and Ken, they're all great friends, and but yeah, so there was this sense that, as Ken puts it, he talks about quadrants of individual and collective and interior and exterior perspectives on the world, and how you can organize disciplines into that matrix and see science as being something that's looking at the exteriors of individuals or of collectives, and like intersubjectivity is the interior of a collective. And I was like, well, this has to do with evolution, because the perception of organisms is what enables the navigation of their environment. So there's this not obvious relationship, but nonetheless very fundamental relationship between mind and communication and the unfolding of form in time, the unfolding of biological form. And I just became completely obsessed with that. And I could not at the time find any place to study it except like I had vertebrate paleontology PhD program applications signed, stamped, and sealed, like ready to go. And then suddenly there's this whole other thing, which was like, you need to apply to the Harvard mathematical biology department to pursue this. And I was like, nope. So I bailed. And I mean, I was strongly discouraged from pursuing these questions as a graduate student by everyone I spoke to. And they, because they were like, tell me what complexity is. And I was like, I don't know. I'm 21. I don't know what I'm talking about. You're supposed to tell me, you're 60. You've been doing this for your whole life. And so I moved to Boulder, Colorado on just as an act of desperation, basically. And there began a 13-year career of painting and making music at festivals and writing for various blogs, speaking all over the place. I just kind of picked up what I could. And I continued asking these questions and how all of that applies to modern technological coevolution, but it wasn't until, 2018, I fell back into the orbit of the Santa Fe Institute through their Interplanetary Festival, and ended up on their communications team, which until very recently was just two people. It was just me and my supervisor. And yeah, so here we are. I mean, it's I don't know. I'm like, I sometimes I feel like I'm like the court jester, because it's like I am in a way nothing. There's like no one more like this like fictional comedic foil from this book written by Michael Crichton, who is friends with Marie Gelman, who is one of the founders of the Institute. So I don't know, maybe I'm a hyperstition or something. Like they used to have a faculty page for that character, and they deleted it out of respect for their dignity. But anyway, there you go.
Thanks for sharing all this. I'm curious, when did psychedelics or, any kind of, non-psychedelic experiences, but psychedelics with the aid of substances or plants or both, when did that come into your life, and how did it shape what you started to put out in the world, with Future Fossils, with your art, with your music? Or did it? I'm curious, because then I want to get into, deeper conversations about psychedelics and consciousness and the world that we're in and where we're going and the future of that. But let's hear a little bit about your, psychedelic influence over the years.
Sure. Well, that same semester that I was reading those life-changing papers, I also took acid for the first time. And also, I should say, I took acid, graduated college, and saw Revenge of the Sith all in the same week. That was a pretty... and that first trip, I discovered Fortet. Like the soundtrack was I think Pause, perhaps Rounds. I can't recall right now. But My Angels rocks back and forth, I think, is the track. Anyway, that actually came a few years after my first psychedelic experience properly, which was in my sophomore year of college with psilocybin mushrooms. And even though I can trace it back further than that, I can trace it back endogenously. There's a, my friend Bruce Damer is fond of talking about endotripping, because your brain produces all this stuff. And I wonder sometimes if I were not endotripping myself as a teenager, because I would be lying in bed and I would have these not exactly out of body experiences, but like I would suddenly feel like I was infinitely vast and also infinitely narrow, like constricted into a point. And I would sit there and I was like, my whole body was like strobing with, and I would tell my friends about this and they're like, are you sure you've never done drugs? And I was like the last one of my friends to do so. But yeah, so anyway, I think probably the proper start is in 2002, right? With psilocybin. And that was a sequence of lake camping trips that I pushed. Like the first time it was just like, I found out my friends were taking mushrooms in the dorms and watching Waking Life. and I like ate some dust on the Frisbee that they were passing around, and that, whatever. But like the first real deal trip was out in Clinton Lake outside of Lawrence, Kansas at the University of Kansas. And from that point forward, I, for I guess three or four iterations, you could say, I doubled the dose just to see, right? So like dust, half an eighth, and then finally 7 grams. And then the 7-gram trip, I was surprised to find I went completely clear and still, and I wasn't having any hallucinations at all, and I wasn't thinking at all. I had just perfectly knocked out what I now know is the default mode network. And all of my friends who had taken half as much as I had were riding a roller coaster or a dragon, like I had brought out Brian Brown Walker's translation of the Tao Te Ching, and I was reading it, and it was making perfect sense to me. And I remember at one point turning to my friend Lewis and saying, "Hey man, you really ought to check this out." I don't remember which chapter it was. "Check this out." And he was like, "You're reading a book right now?" Like, what? And then another of my friends was having a bad trip and thought the people camping at the next site over were vampires. So I found myself in this position of having to basically like tend the fire and care for everyone else in my party on double the dose. And I think that really, and at that time I had been playing guitar for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And I found a fluency in my playing that I had never experienced before. Suddenly I was able to improvise it like on a new level of facility. So I was like, all right, cool. Probably not necessarily going to do another 7-gram dose anytime soon, but there is like it shaped my thinking in terms of, again, like states of consciousness. And Alan Combs actually has written a book about this, about thinking about states of consciousness as strange attractors, meaning, it's never quite the same state, but it kind of orbits this sort of thing in a in the way that like weather systems, like you never get the same storm twice, but you're going to get the same storm around the same time every year. That's a chaotic thing. And the brain's electrical activity is weather. And thinking about phase transitions between states of consciousness in terms of the movement from one attractor to another attractor. And that became really clear that like dosage has like you can take a small amount and then you're actually lodged kind of like you're in between. And I'll just, I know you have other questions, but so I'll just say that like years later, when I was initiated into DMT, one of the things that came through for me not too far along in my explorations with that, which were very patient, and I continue to be like extremely like it's like years in between these experiences. But like I remember at one point getting a clear message that, at least in my case, the injunction or the prescription should be not to go, pardon the expression, balls deep, but to sit there in the liminal zone and, to try and anchor psychedelic insights into my own eyes open waking experience, like not to close my eyes and get lost in fantasy land and like look at all the candy colors, but like sit there and really look at the room and be in my body and like think about the what it means to accept the fact that this is one place. It's not two different places. It's one thing. And you're just, but like if you get the radio dial just right, you can tune into kind of both stations at the same time and then new music emerges. So anyway, that's my rant.
No, I actually love what you just shared about that space, that liminal space. I actually just spoke about that recently where I said my favorite experiences are not going balls deep anymore. I think that was something I was really into when I was a lot younger. But now is about, like you said, like being able to navigate in the present moment and navigate both. And actually I've found that it ends up taking you much deeper to not just be like shot out into whatever space where it's so easy to just want to leave, right? Like that's kind of like the human condition. Like we all just want to leave on some level. But I feel like the real benefits of navigating this embodied life that, we're in, whether we like it or not, is in that state of being able to be conscious and aware and present and navigate and actually take home the quote lessons and insights from these spaces, not just be, I mean, even with mushrooms, like I can't even do large doses anymore because I just forget everything. I mean, I can do them, and it's kind of interesting, but it's not, to me, it's not as productive for, coming back to my human life, which is, kind of, I, at least in my personal opinion, I'm like, well, it's kind of the point, unless you just want to escape for a while, but then you could also escape by just, I don't know, watching Netflix. I guess that's what people do these days. But I have some questions for you about, as a futurologist, and the work that you're doing, with what you've been doing for a while. I'm curious what your views are on the current state of the psychedelic space and where it's all going, because this is something I like to talk about a lot. Is what is this all about? Why is there this huge, I mean, we all know they've been around for a very long time, especially the plants, it's like these are ancient plants. But there's this exponential growth in the interest and use and the demand for having a, consciousness expansion experience, and not just psychedelics with the plants or the medicines, but other forms of experiences that people are getting more and more into. And I'm curious, what are your views on how, like, why this is here now? Like I always say, like, why now? What's happening? Like, why is this, I'm curious to know if this is something you talk about and explore a lot as well. What are your views on this?
You mentioned the talk I gave at Moogfest
Mm-hmm.
from my bio, which was, first of all, it was, this is not something that I would have said had I been on 7 grams, but it was like immensely awkward to sit here and listen to you read the whole bio and be like, oh, that's me. But the Moogfest talk, which again was actually given to me by Bruce Damer, because they invited Dennis first, and Dennis McKenna couldn't make it, and then Dennis recommended Bruce, and Bruce couldn't make it, and so Bruce recommended me. Yay. That talk was about our psychedelic century and about the way that I see as Terence McKenna did, I see the timing of the eruption of various psychoactive compounds into global markets and into common use as part of this like sweeping symphonic, like big history that has everything to do with the other ways in which we are embedded in our ecosystems. Like if you know, like there's like food webs, but there's also use webs. My friend and colleague Stephanie Crabtree is an archaeoecologist at the Santa Fe Institute and talks about studying how, like, you know, if you look at not just the way that humans, you know, they might fish and hunt and so on, gather you know, plants, but then they also use certain things specifically for like tools or medicines, and that counts in the expanded trophic network, right? So there's a use web that, and I think that that's really important, because that's one of the things that comes out of the psychedelic experience for a lot of people, is understanding your role as not on the top of some, you know, idealized low dimensional, you know, BS rhetorical self-congratulating food chain, but as embedded in an ecology where you are food for other things. And in fact, you know, starting in 2007, when I became or 2007 or 2008, when I became a contributor to Reality Sandwich, the website that, you know, it used to be, that was sort of the thing, is like this question, like you know, the Reality Sandwich is like, well, what are you feeding? You know, that was you know, to his credit, co-founder Daniel Pinchbeck had that same understanding and recognized that, you know, as so many people do, that through our lives and our work and our service, you know, we are living for something. And it's not always something good. And of course, it's many things at once, right? Well, as most of your listeners probably know, Reality Sandwich got eaten in a hostile takeover a few years ago. And like the dozens of my friends that had contributed to that platform for over a decade found our work expropriated. And there's a great write-up on Symposia about this, to which I contributed, by the Delic Corporation. And the Delic came in and completely rebranded the whole thing and turned it into something that none of us would have ever supported. And it was nightmarish to those of us who had been, you know, working on this for so long, to see the like garish, obscene repurposing of all of this stuff as a kind of like user-friendly manual and guidebook for new trippers. Like they were trying to onboard people like Coachella, right? Like, get your wristband, you know, and here we go. And I might not have had as much of a problem with it if they had actually honored my takedown request, which they originally said that they would. And then 24 hours later, they came back and they said, actually, according to our attorneys, we own all of your writing. Which Daniel, bless him, had the nerve to reply to them on behalf of everyone who had contributed to that platform, and said, we never had anything but an honor agreement between these people that were volunteering their time. Like we never took their copyright. You know, we never took the stuff away from them. But I guess the point is that, like, this is something that happens wherever you look, in wave after wave, all through history, according to the sort of, you know, this internally consistent logic of capitalism, which is actually founded in a much deeper logic of biophysics and growth and the scaling of networks and the economies of scale and the benefits, like, so there's all of this stuff that I've learned from complexity economics at the Santa Fe Institute about how systems grow and grow and grow and then basically undermine themselves and become, fragile and collapse. And it has given me a more rigorous footing from which to perceive and articulate things about the psychedelic renaissance that we're living through right now, which in many ways is extraordinarily positive. And yet, as one of my favorite historians, William Irwin Thompson, was fond of noting, there are tensions. There's a kind of a dialectic in each historical era. In the 19th and early 20th century, it was between the artist and the industrialist. And now the artist has been basically subsumed into industry. You look at like paintings hanging on the walls of banks. You look at Beeple selling NFT, an NFT for $69 million. He proposed that the next wave would be between the technocrat and the mystic. And his, and in saying that, he was speaking in sympathy with the monks of the Lindisfarne monastery, which was sacked by the Vikings, and saying that like the true sort of core of the human spirit and of the work of culture and knowledge production and so on, continues as an underground river through these waves of repeated colonization. And so I don't really know. Like, I've been thinking about this for, before you and I talked about this, we were talking about Google Glass and like my experiences with that, which is wrapped up in all of this, like it's that, that they're like with all these technologies and with living beings that we instrumentalize, operationalize as technologies, there's this constant kind of cross current. There's movement where people are hammering bells into cannons and hammering cannons into bells, or there's like I've written an essay about the evolution of surveillance, going back 500 million years to the evolution of the eye, and how, like, if you look at the proliferation of surveillance technology now, that the more cameras we place, the more blind spots we create. And so it's this ongoing sort of thermodynamic thing over which we have relatively little control. And so I don't know. I mean, I guess, I'm speaking as somebody who accepts that basically the human being is, I think, under real existential assault from the sort of like archontic forces of our institutions, these things that we've created as a way of sheltering ourselves from, the harms and ravages of an unpredictable world, but have for thousands of years taken on a life of their own. And it's a very real question. It's a question I explore in Future Fossils podcast all the time. As I would say pointedly, look to my episode with Chris Ryan, anthropologist and a host of Tangentially Speaking podcast, because we discussed his book Civilized to Death, I think in episode 178. And, talking about thinking about civilization and its institutions as life forms in their own right, and that we are embedded in them as bacteria are embedded in us, living in our intestines, right? Or wherever. So how does that, how does that transfigure us? How does that change the way that we need to think about this stuff? I, you know, I have to be very, very careful about this because the rightly, as they were leading me on stage at Boom Festival in 2016 to give a talk that ultimately precipitated this whole book that I've been working on ever since. They're like, lots of people are journeying today, so please bear that in mind, right? Like that living online is a psychedelic experience, right? Like it's doing everything in some weird way. It's like an externalization of, I mean, I wouldn't be, if Terrence were alive today, I would be riffing with him on, to what degree were all of those alchemical intuitions and prophecies and so on, to what degree have they manifested, in physical form? And Bill Thompson also talked about the personal computer and the internet as a puncturing of the veil between the world of the humans and the worlds of spirits and gods. In his book, Coming into Being, he talked about in the Rig Veda that there's, the humans and animals team up and collaborate to push all of those beings out into their own realms. And that what we've done now is we've punctured this and we've let them all back in. And that was his caution to psychonauts also, which was, there's, in becoming more porous, in becoming what my mentor Richard Doyle calls ecodelic, you are interrogating the boundary of self and other, and in so doing, essentially issuing an invitation to the quote unquote other to come on in. And so all of us now are dealing with this question about what it means to be either the terminal node of some global, Lovecraftian, eldritch kind of thing that like people are not really actually controlling, right? Like it's, or also to be like the sort of as above, so below other angle on that is to be an ecology, right? Think about like my friend Sophie Strand, who she and Rich have both been on my show also, and they were on the same episode. I encourage people to go back and check it out. Anyway, that like, so like nested, embedded, continuous selves. And when we think about what that means for capitalism, all I can really do is point to people and point people to this essay I wrote, Improvising Out of Algorithmic Isolation, which is about how the more finely we are quantified and scrutinized and analyzed in order to be marketed to, in order to be understood and modulated, the more the pirate utopia or temporary autonomous zone has to move into something that is truly metamorphic, that is, as Bio Akuma Lafay says, like, fugitivity defines this time, that we are, we cannot find, I think anyway, the kind of security that we want in a, what is it in OK Computer, Radiohead, they talk about, like a pig in a cage on antibiotics.
Mm.
Like that's what these, what these corporations that are just like, oh, we can make psychedelics that don't make you trip, but they just cure your depression so that you can go back to work. It's like they're trying to, it's like everything has to be bent in this direction. Or even if it's, or like Compass Pathways trying to patent psilocybin therapy on a couch, like you shall not pass. But at the same time, they will, like this stuff is going to happen.
Yeah.
And so the underground continues, and there will always be an outlaw realm, and there will always be a liminal spaces. And that's what really matters. Like the whole point of all of this is that third spaces, right? Not the home, not the work, matter in urban design, and they matter in the design of our culture. And like, we need places of, we need to preserve ecstasis. And so this is the longest damn answer to your question, but like at all costs, wilderness must be preserved or we will all die. That wilderness includes the wilderness of the uncategorizable self. We cannot lie to ourselves about the ultimate scope of our potential knowledge. And I think there's hope in this, right? It's because for the very same reason that people fall through the cracks, and don't get kind of government services and social recognition, we can also escape the panopticon by queering ourselves, by accepting that this world is getting stranger and stranger, and that as we learn more, the sort of the surface area of our questioning exceeds the surface area of our answering and continues to grow beyond it. Okay, sorry. You've got more questions and we've only got 10 minutes, but
that's a great answer. No, I appreciate hearing this. I know I need to bring you back on to dive into like the 5 areas I would love to dive into. But the one thing that keeps coming up for me, because I know this is a lot of the work that you do, is, you mentioned capitalism and systems and, navigating these times and, like the algorithms and this world and these, corporations. And yeah, I mean, we could do multiple podcasts on the patents that are happening out there in the psychedelic world. But I'm curious, how do you personally navigate these times? This is like, it's so complex. It's also very simple on some level too, but like there's a lot of talk out there about, okay, just take psychedelics and they'll make you feel better, like, because people can't make sense of this world. People, maybe who don't have a certain level of connection to themselves, to a spiritual practice, to the earth, and they just are freaking out. We all know, everybody's heard stories. We've seen this over the last few years, especially. So of course the conversation is like, oh, well, microdose and it will save you, or, take this new drug that doesn't make you trip, but it'll cure all your depression. It's like, well, what's at the root of the depression and the anxiety and the human condition? And I'm curious, how do you navigate it? Or how do you, if someone came to you and said, like, I can't make sense out of this, and it's just so hard to be a human right now, what do you say to them? Or how do you navigate this? I'm curious, other than channeling all your energy into questioning it.
Well, you told me that Daniel Shankin recommended me, and I would recommend Daniel for that question. I think that, the path of the heart is really the thing here. Like I said, my mentor, Richard Doyle, who has written probably the best book on psychedelics I've ever read, which is saying a lot. His book, Darwin's Pharmacy, Sex, Plants, and the Evolution of the Noosphere, is the only place I've ever found in writing a thesis on all of those ideas I was talking about at the very beginning, about the relationship between mind and language and, intelligence and consciousness and coevolution, symbiosis, and, major evolutionary transitions and so on. And he links it all to this sort of the way that symbiosis folds the manifold of attention onto itself. The plant harvests the attention of its pollinator, and so we have we're interwoven with all of these coevolutionary exploits. And he gives the best, I think, articulation of this so-called stoned ape hypothesis that anyone ever has, saying that it wasn't about, mushrooms didn't cause modern human cognition by improving visual acuity or whatever nonsense, Terence slapped at the wall on that one. But that it was actually something else that he had said, which was that they had improved his eloquence, and that by creating an obstacle course for language itself, for communication, by giving us experiences that elude our ability to communicate them, that psychedelics beckoned us into more brilliant communication, which is like the peacock tail of the human being, right? It's a demonstration of brain fitness, and therefore a proxy for so many other things as far as like mate selection is concerned. So Rich's untestable hypothesis is that, psychedelics make us sexier, basically, or did anyway. And of course, by dissolving boundaries and so on and so. But so, another thing that Rich says about all of this, and again, this gets to the sort of bimodal, you think about like just waking consciousness and as a psychedelic state as, two attractor basins. I think, and again, living online as we are, we're kind of on like a low dose of psychedelics all the time with this porous self-boundary. And Rich is one of many people who have pointed to this, what Robert Anton Wilson called chapel perilous, like the boundary layer between the personal and the transpersonal. And this is where people start seeing the patterns that connect everything, and it starts driving them nuts, and if you don't finally release yourself into the stream of, the ongoing, eruption of the Godhead or whatever, then you set yourself aside from all of that and see it as a vast conspiracy that is going to devour you. What Bob Wilson's point was that we're all in on this conspiracy, that we're the Illuminati. Richard Doyle takes it a slightly different way and says basically, paranoia is a pit stop on the way to metanoia. And his publishing imprint, Metanoia Press, where I hope I will have this book published soon, is, what I would say is that, it's like, if you can't take it, it's not for you to take. None of us are supposed to be shouldering the burden of everything we behold. It's the human condition. I mean, we are obligate social organisms. And culture accelerates this to an insane degree. Like, there's no way that even at this point, experts in their own fields can't keep up with the advancement of knowledge in their own domain of expertise. We need each other. And how exactly we will find better ways to rely on one another in the next few decades is an area of my like sort of central preoccupation. How do we stitch this all together as it continues to, grow and grow wildly beyond our understanding and control? I don't know, but I would just say, look, if you're struggling, anchor yourself in simple things. Have a glass of water, get a warm blanket, or, a cool towel around your neck. Reach out to somebody that you love.
Simple.
Life is hard. The world is trippy enough, and I'm not always convinced that tripping more is going to make it easier. So yeah.
No. Michael, I know we have to run. We have like literally 30 seconds. We're going to have to bring you back on because I have 1,000 questions for you. But I want to leave you space to shout out whatever you have going on, your Patreon or your work. This book, when is this book coming out? Things like that.
Well, it's mostly there. If you just go to my like Medium account, it's there. Substack is actually my blog for other stuff. But go check that out. Patreon. I mean, I'm everywhere. It's actually like linktr.ee, like Linktree.
Yeah.
Michael Garfield has got all that stuff. So, go look it up. Enjoy. And thank you. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you so much for being here, Michael. I really appreciate your time, and I can't wait to get into this again. We'll have you on soon.
Sounds good.